Hello and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran wondering how to upload your new album to Deezer, or else a scrappy upstart thinking very hard if you know a single living human being who actually listens to their music on Deezer, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey you guys, it's the last Friday of January 2020. New year, new me, new you, new all of us, new podcast. Thanks for being here. This month's episode is brought to you by Bandzoogle, built by musicians and for musicians. Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay someone called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Friedrich who drove a white Dodge Neon with an aftermarket spoiler, and Friedrich would tell you that he only listens to DJ Shadow, and then he would charge you $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in like a month. But it's the future now, and we don't have to deal with Friedrich anymore. We have nice things now. We have Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. It has hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, mailing list tools to grow your fan list and send newsletters. They even have a crowdfunding feature that lets you crowdfund your next project commission-free. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com and try it for free for 30 days. That's a good deal. Just use the promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Thank you for continuing to sponsor us in 2020, Bandzoogle. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming months, here's where I'll be. In February, I will be in Manhattan, Boston, Brooklyn, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, Burlington, Vermont, Northampton, Massachusetts, Buffalo, Rochester, Ann Arbor, Toronto, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Charleston, and Washington, D.C. at the 930 Club. If you're close to any one of those towns or you live in town, come see a show. We've been doing this for a while, and I'd like to think that we've got the hang of it, and we will give you a very enjoyable night of music. Head on over to joepugmusic.com to pick up tickets. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, you could do a couple things to help out. You could support the show over at Patreon. That's a website where you can pledge money towards works of art that you dig. So you just head over to their site, Patreon, type in my name or the name of the podcast, and you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. The other things that you could do to help out, which don't cost money, are you could write a review for the show in the iTunes store. That helps us out. Or you could just go old school and spread the word by telling a friend. And writing a review or telling a friend are free. And the math on those things, as always, is they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. So be on the right side of history. Thank you guys very much, and I hope you guys dig the show. My guest this month is the creative force behind Fruit Bats. Eric D. Johnson grew up in the Chicagoland area and got his start as an instructor at the Old Town School of Folk Music. From there, he joined the legendary experimental folk outfit Caliphone as a touring member. After playing the band some recordings of his own, they released his first album on their label, Perishable. Then he was off and running. A record deal with Sub Pop followed, a stint as a touring member of the Shins when they were at the height of their arc, performing on Saturday Night Live and things like that. And most of all, he continued with a string of critically acclaimed albums that have made Fruit Bats a beloved indie rock institution. They've appeared at Bonnaroo and Sasquatch Festival. They've made TV appearances on Last Call with Carson Daly and The Late Late Show with Craig Ferguson. They've toured with My Morning Jacket and The Shins. They've recorded for Perishable Records, Sub Pop, and Merge Records. Variety magazine said of their last album, "There won't be many albums in 2019 with as many quotable, cut-to-the-marrow lines as this one has." Glide magazine has called that same album 70s AM radio ear candy. And Rolling Stone has praised his, quote, raggedly pretty, warmly disaffected songwriting style. I was sneakily in Los Angeles for a single day this last month, and Eric was kind enough to swing by my hotel and have a chat. I had a blast hearing about his journey so far. When I'm doing whenever I'm traveling with a band, I get the shittiest airport 30-minute drive from the venue hotels, and then whenever I'm doing solo stuff, I'm just oh yeah, we're going with the Westin downtown.
I know. Became a hotel, not snob, but after I had that little stint in Shins for 4 years.
Yeah.
I got really spoiled.
So, oh man, that's sweet. So were you guys just on a bus and then staying sometimes in hotels, or was it hotels every night?
We were on a bus and then staying sometimes in hotels when it made sense, because we would do multi-night stands, and then we were also sometimes doing that was the type of band where you just do a whole promo week in Tokyo or something. It was incredible, where you just kind of go and do radios. It was nuts. But
I feel like that's not only a symptom of a band being that big, but that's almost like a thing from another time.
It is from another
especially
time.
For this type of music.
We would go to Tokyo, London, and New York for a week each.
And that's pre-tour just for press.
Yeah.
See, that's what I thought it was going to be when I got into this game.
Yeah. It only is if you're at that level. And I don't even think that band does that anymore. This was in 2006 at the height.
Yeah, yeah.
Everything.
Yeah, oh man. Yeah, I had a buddy who toured for a while in Ray LaMontagne's band, and he was like, man, I got pretty used to the Four Seasons, man. Got pretty used to that.
I knew some of the guys in that band too, and that was they stayed in really nice hotels in that band.
Yeah, yeah.
But I love a good 3.5. I don't know.
Yeah, I was on Priceline from day one. As soon as Priceline came out.
Well, there was a golden era of the Priceline name your own price.
Yes, yeah. Now it's just the marketplace for hotels. You're going to get what you get. But there was that era where you'd be $48.
Yeah.
You're going to say yes to me for a 3.5 star Priceline? They were like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
You can have this.
I do hotels.com now.
Why?
Because it's a point system. It's kind of like a frequent flyer miles kind of thing.
Oh.
And you get free hotels after. If you're on tour a bunch and you're putting up a bunch of bandmates, you get free hotel.
Oh, I'm doing that for this next tour then. Starting now.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That was a tour manager hipped me to that once and was like, you got to do hotels.com.
Oh, I'm switching immediately. You know what we tried to do on the last one, and it was really economical, but it just didn't quite feel right, was the Airbnb thing for bands.
Yeah, it only works if it's a 2-night stand and you really got to vet it right.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people are the professional hosts now and they got it down, but it's really awesome. You can put up a whole band in a house for $100, which is cool. But also I found band members aren't just, they're not really into there's some anonymity and convenience to a hotel that people really like. Yeah. That's worth it.
How many people are you out with usually?
I just go out with 2 band members.
Okay.
An upright bass player and a keyboard player.
That's great.
Yeah. And then I tour manage it myself too, because I'm a cheap fuck.
We have a tour manager now the past few years, which is awesome, but I love tour managing. I was good at it. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not even that I don't mind it. I almost prefer it. Now, I'm sure if I got the right tour manager, I'd be like, what was I talking about? It's got to be nice to have that. But I like planning the days. I like knowing exactly where we're going to stay. I like all that stuff.
Yeah.
Myself. Well, let's go before your stint with the Shins and everything. You came out of Chicago, and you and I were kind of ships in the night in Chicago, because I got my start there around 2007, 8, and 9, and you were already out of the city by then, obviously.
Yeah.
You were there in the late 90s with that's when like Caliphone was coming up and doing stuff, and like Joan of Arc was in the city, and Red Meat and stuff like that. What did the city look like when you started playing music, and how did you get into it?
Chicago was weird. When I try to think back to it now, I don't know if I'm remembering it wrong or if I'm remembering it through the lens of like a sort of shy early 20 something kind of like very insecure kind of I'm always like, it wasn't cool, like no one liked me there, and
okay.
When I actually think back to it, I'm like, it was fine, it was great.
Right.
I wasn't super I played in Caliphone. That was kind of like my first gig.
Okay. How did that come about?
That came about because I was working at the Old Town School of Folk Music.
Right on.
And one of my students was a friend of Tim's from Caliphone, and they were kind of looking for somebody who could play banjo, sort of obviously like what Caliphone does, which is this like traditional music, but completely like on its ear, and super weird. And she recommended me, and also I was just kind of like from out of nowhere. I had been a super fan of Red Meat. Mm-hmm. It was a huge moment for me in my life, and it completely like set my life on track. Which is 20 years ago, like right now. Could be like 20 years ago today, actually. It was like January of 2000.
Wow.
So yeah, I'm kind of coming up on all these 20-year milestones.
Yeah, man.
But that was that sort of set my life, like set the sailboat off into the ocean.
Yeah. Kind
of thing. We went on this crazy 6-week tour. The opening band, who were the first of 3 openers, were Shins. So I like met all those guys. The tour was opening for Modest Mouse, like right when they signed to Epic, and it was six weeks. I'd never barely left the Midwest. It was just like saw the whole country, met everybody, and like was kind of doing this Fruit Bats cassette, like sort of 4-track bedroom project. Was very, I always say unambitious, but probably not unambitious. Just like ambitious, but had no idea how to implement anything.
Gotcha. Like if you'd had the opportunity or the budget to go into a studio, you would have. But
I was just kind of doing things on 4-track, and I just had this very like small plan of like, I didn't know what. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed making things. I was working at the Old Town School, and I did that tour, saw how everything worked, and I remember the third to last day of that tour, driving up the 5 from LA to San Francisco or something like that. A drive that I now know very well, but at the time was this kind of weird exotic thing. And I remember like thinking to myself, like, okay, when I get home, I gotta like figure out I wanted to do this.
Yes. Now, when you say you got to see how everything worked, what do you mean by that? Were you just how it worked on a larger scale of how you get like a record deal or something, or just how you stay healthy before a show on tour, or how
a larger scale. Just I saw like that there are people who are in bands and
they do this.
You do this, like, and there's a way you do this, and it's not like totally crazy. 'Cause I think before it had just been like, that's like going to NASA and becoming an astronaut or something like that. I was interested in it, but this was kind of, the internet was around. I didn't even have the internet. Mm-hmm. I had to go to Kinko's on tour to check my email. But I didn't have like a computer or anything. Yeah. I mean, I wasn't surfing the internet, and there was not iPhones. Talking about it like it was 100 years ago or something, but kind of feels that way. But I think I had the Musicians Magazine Guide to Touring and Promotion. It was like the 1996 edition or something that was like sat in my living room for 3 years, and it had like venues in the back. I need to find that, actually. That's something on eBay that I need to find.
Yes.
The 1997, I would love to look at that.
Man, that would be worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah. But I looked at it a lot, so I just did this thing, and I was like, I want to do this. I kind of see how it works now.
Right. We're kind of like proof of concept. Like, there are people doing this.
Yeah.
You know? Because even now, when I explain to people in my life like, oh yeah, like I'm a musician. I just go around to clubs and play music, and people are just kind of like, "That's a thing? Like you can do that?" I'm like,
can do
well,
that.
It's kind of hard, but yeah, you can.
You have to be good.
Yeah.
Like you can't. I mean,
yeah.
I think, and it changes. Everyone's like, it was better back then, but it was just different, and it changes from generation to every generation. There's a different paradigm, that you do it. I'm listening to the audiobook of the Elton John autobiography now.
Yeah.
Which is awesome.
Did he read it?
He does not read it. It's the actor who plays him in the Elton John biopic reads it and is great actually. Elton John reads the
foreword or something.
The foreword.
Okay.
But it's like you hear from that 60s and 70s era, or like how the band got their start and stuff, where you just kind of like, you got in a weird car and you drove around and you played 3 shows a night or something like that, and it sounded really weird but kind of strangely sustainable too. Like even when they talk about how much money they made, I'm like, that's kind of like the same as now.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually like, because I've read Levon's biography, This Wheel's on Fire, and
it's great. And it's very illuminating of that.
It is. Like when you read that and you see kind of like the math of like, well, we go around with Ronnie Hawkins and we play in Ottawa for 3 sets a night. We'd each make $50. That added up to $150 a piece, or whatever the numbers were.
Yeah.
It that all made a lot of sense to me when I read it. And actually, it's kind of amazing to me. That seems like something, that system of clubs where people go out to see music on a very, modest scale. It does seem like something that should have died like a long time ago.
Yeah.
And yet it's still going strong.
Yeah. It's still I think live music is still it's the last vestige of, it's the only thing, and, everyone's always announcing its demise too, which could be. I don't really know what's going to happen. I'm not a good prognosticator for whatever. But people are always like, people are going to only watch concerts on YouTube or something. Which I'm like, maybe I don't know. But it's still the last currently old-fashioned, old-timey way to promote your band in the most deeply analog way imaginable, which is like getting in your little caravan wagon and going down the road to the next town with
burning some dinosaur bones to the next place.
Yeah, with the traveling minstrel show.
Yeah. I definitely feel like a person out of time sometimes because of that. And I don't know why it's held on. I think it does speak to, when I first had kids, you see immediately like at like 2-3 weeks old, they're responding to music.
Yeah.
Like they're responding to it. And so there's got to be something hardwired in, and there's got to be something hardwired about being in the room and going to see it.
Yeah.
Go back for a second. You were saying when you got introduced to Tim and the Caliphone guys by the student in your class that like one moment set you on a track. Do you think that you were always destined to, like, you would have found that moment at one point or another, or do you sometimes think like, wow, man, if I had missed that, maybe it just would have gone a totally different way and it just would have worked out different?
I don't know. I think that's hard to say. I do think about that kind of like, and that I don't know if that's like fatalistic thinking, or would that be fatalism? I'm not sure. Fatalism always sounds like something bad, but when you think about fate, like, and like if I had not done this, what had my Back to the Future timeline? But would I be disappearing in the photo? And sorry, I'm just making a Back to the Future reference now, but I would have. I think I was always like, if we rewind even further back, I was always gonna be.
Yes.
In showbiz or something like that. It was just sort of what I was interested in. From the Midwest, pretty like my family's just very like, no one's like in the arts or entertainment at all. And I was like, it was sort of like I was saying, even up till I just didn't know how it worked. I was interested in it, but the implementation seemed completely alien to me.
Yeah.
It's always interesting to me, people who, and not that I did not grow up on, I'm not from like rural Nebraska or something. I'm from just right outside of Chicago. We had access to arts and culture and everything too, but so I don't mean to make it sound like I'm grew up in a coal mining hauler or something.
Sure, but you didn't grow up in Los Angeles with Scientologist parents.
That's what I mean. Yeah, I think and now I have good friends who like grew up in Manhattan or L.A. and even if they didn't have parents in the business or something, it's still like they didn't have to be like, how would you even move here or something like that. They're just like, oh yeah, this is So yeah, I think there's a little if you're just not from that world, there's a little there's an extra thing of just the implementation of it. But even for me, it was just tough even starting a band or something that seemed and it seemed a little it's definitely like a Midwest thing to be like, don't be a big man, don't be a big fancy man. Like that was like something you have to sort of overcome a little bit, and just the ridiculousness of.
Yes.
Which I'm still embarrassed to tell people I'm in a band. I usually make up a lie on a plane.
Yes.
To my seatmate. I say I'm in the music business.
Yeah.
Or something, and sort of try to make it sound like I'm especially now that I'm in my 40s, I look like I would just be like a suit maybe, or well, I have long hair and stuff. I don't look like a suit, but I look like I could just be some kind of a behind the scenes person.
I'm not from the Midwest, but I think the reason I always really identify with Chicago is I have that part of my personality where, like I usually don't tell people on planes what I do for a living, or when there are people in my life that I know, like let's say I go to a playground and I know people because they play with my kids, they'll see like, something will come up in their advertising. They say, oh, hey, you're playing the 930 Club coming up. We're going to come on out to that show. And there's still a part of me that's just like, no, don't feel like you have to do that. Like, really, it'd be better if you didn't, like... Let's just keep this how it is. I don't want you to feel obligated to do anything.
Yeah.
When it's really just people being genuinely nice and genuinely interested.
Yeah, I have that. That's like, and anybody can have that. It's not totally geographically specific, but I like to chalk it up to Midwestiness. I'm also Scandinavian too, which is like a double whammy of like. There's like a Swedish word that doesn't even have a translation. That just means sort of being low key and not sticking out too much. And it's been a challenge for me. I think the Scando-Midwestern.
I heard a story once about Finnish people. And I heard it from Swedish people when I was over there. But they said if you go into a bar in Finland and you start drinking or you start talking, someone goes. Are we here to talk or are we here to drink?
That sounds about right.
So I don't know how apocryphal that is. But you really did get the double whammy with the Scandinavian darkness and the Midwest modesty there, man.
Yeah, but also I was always kind of like a weird little show kid too,
really?
In a lot of ways. Like, I mean, I didn't do theater or anything like that, but I was just always like a real ham in the family, and I was always making up songs and writing short stories and stuff like
So it didn't come out of nowhere, like when you mentioned to your folks, like, hey, I'm 20 years old and I'm going to go on the road throughout America for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. Won't be going to college, won't be doing this. I'll be in a van somewhere. They were cool?
Yeah, I did not go to college. I did that instead of college, and I mean, I had been, and obviously, like, I was like 23 when I started out, so it was already clear I was not going to college. But
sure.
But I was, I was just, and college is a great thing. I've been very lucky that it worked out for me, and I don't have student debt, and I didn't go. But I think it's great for some people. And sometimes in my dark moments when you have these really slow couple of years or something, and you know how that goes, and where I'm just like, I could probably I always have like my weird fantasy job is that I'm like the cool American studies professor at some really rad university in Vermont or something, and I'm like, writing short stories in the summertime, but I'm like, no, you got to have a PhD to do that.
No, anytime it takes
or any college education, which I have none. So.
No, anytime it takes my manager or my agent just a couple days longer than it should to get back to me, I immediately start Googling like elevator repairman courses in my area. It was like online, online courses to complete this, that, or the other. I'm with you there on that one.
Yeah, that's, but I think everybody does that.
I think everybody does that, not only in this business, but anytime you're working on your own and you're basically a freelancer or contract work. I mean, it's basically what we are. You can have a great tour, make clubs a bunch of money, and then if you come back and the tour kind of flops, it's like, well, we don't care what you did 2 tours ago, man. Like,
no. Yeah, it's totally what have you done for me lately as the...
as they have to be.
Yeah.
I mean, if they want to run a club, they're the ones, paying the rent for the club and the insurance there, and I get it. But it's there's no pay for past performance.
Yeah. That's why I like living in LA these days, too, is it has there is a vision, and this people for generations have come here and been crushed and disappointed. Sure. But there is a little bit, especially for like a guy my age, being like the mid-level indie rock guy for 20 years. I'm like, this is a good town for like when you've graduated from that. This is I like being in a place where I can hustle a little bit.
Yeah.
And there's a million hustles that you can sort of get going here. But, I think I like younger Midwest friends of mine who lived on the coast are moving back and buying houses and stuff like that. But I'm from Chicago, which is not, it's not like I'm gonna go home and buy a $800,000 Greystone. It's not
right.
like I come from the one place where
I know you can't move back to Kansas City and buy a 4-bedroom house for $90,000.
Yes, which I have a good friend that did that exact thing to Kansas City. But I'm from like the one place that's not.
That's kind of not
where you
fair.
Can triumphantly go home. I'm like, this is why I always I'll sort of pull the Midwest card a little bit, and I'm like, but I'm from the kind of the Tokyo of the Midwest or something.
Oh no, man! Chicago is a legit metropolis, man. And it's the only legit metropolis outside of New York, here in L.A. and San Fran, maybe.
Yeah,
Seattle now too.
Yeah,
I guess, but.
Chicago's its own animal with its own strange beating heart. It's I love it. I miss it a lot.
I miss it a lot too. If I didn't have family where I live now, I think I'd be in Chicago, man. I miss it. I just jive with that city every time I go back. It's reinforced all the more. It hasn't really changed. People are still kind of doing their thing unapologetically, and it's great. So when did you're on the road? That interesting tour where Caliphone is in the middle of a bill with Shins First to 3 and Modest Mouse closing the night. Where do you go from there? How does Fruit Bats go from this project that you're either unambitiously or ambitiously and ineptly putting together?
Ambitiously and ineptly is probably the word for it.
How does that go from sort of a bedroom project, for lack of a better word, to the beginning of what you have now, which is this wonderful indie rock thing?
It all happened relatively fast, which is to say it happened all in about a 2-year span, I guess, after that.
Yeah, that's fast.
And that was a good time to do things fast, because that was starting to be, that was the era where it was about to get hard, and I kind of got in right at the buzzer there. But basically, so the Caliphone guys had their own label, Perishable,
right,
and their own studio, Clava, all in the same building, which had been sort of like we had rehearsed there with Caliphone. So fast forward like 6 months to a year or something after that tour, had obviously bonded with those guys and everything, and
totally.
And like I think it took a tour or two for me to even mention that I was writing songs and like having this again chalks up to my unambition or I think my low-keyness or something. I did not want them to think that I was like, hey, and also I'm doing this thing. Here's my tape.
So the real reason that I'm here is totally.
So I'd kind of like bided my time a little bit, and then eventually was like, actually, here's some songs, and Tim immediately was like, we'll put these out. Like he's like, we'll make a record for you and put them out.
Wow.
He kind of heard something in it. When I hear them now, they're pretty kind of not just primitive sound wise, but very like, I was not writing at the highest level yet. Well, but I was. But they saw something in it, and they ended up putting it out. And it sort of, I think it just kind of somehow fit right in. And it came out in October of 2001. And I think it just sort of fit right in at that moment with sort of the beginning of like Iron and Wine and some of the softer side of Shins, and like the really pervasive bands at that time were like the White Stripes and the Strokes, and sort of New York like party rock music, you know. So I think there is, but also Yankee Hotel Foxtrot I think came out.
It definitely didn't come out in the 90s. So
I believe it was 2001. Okay, I could be wrong. There was a little bit of like a call for that kind of thing, and which is what I was doing, and I wasn't doing it to answer any call. I was just sort of like whatever combination of influences I had, they were culminating in something that was going to be in that universe.
Sure.
And that universe was Sub Pop too, and I had met Shins, and Modest Mouse was sort of ostensible. I kind of just made this little Pacific Northwest crew for some reason.
Sure.
Just out of that tour, that I just connected with those people in that place.
Yeah.
Which, and then Sub Pop signed me, which is insane.
Yeah.
Because that first Fruit Bats record came out on Perishable, was like, I wouldn't even call it a modest success. It was below modest. Got a really bad review in Pitchfork.
Oh, man.
Where they said, this is destined for the bargain bin. This is a band that's destined for the bargain bin.
Wow.
And had a booking agent and was touring, and like other bands liked it, which has always been a little bit of a thing. And then Caliphone was kind of like that too. But it's an awesome thing, and occasionally dubious, but definitely like a band's band. And for whatever reason, there was a wing of Sub Pop of people who were kind of they liked that stuff.
Sure.
And we got signed. And I think that they kind of heard that. I think they could sense that I maybe could write some poppy type things too, because the first Fruit Bats record was very ephemeral, and it did not have hooky, but maybe it did. I don't know. They saw something in it too. People were seeing things in me, which I think in today's climate, if you're a 23-year-old undeveloped singer-songwriter, that's not going to happen to you now.
Probably not.
Like there's no developmental league anymore for that. You have to be really fully baked coming out.
The developmental league is basically you just having your own Instagram account where you push that out into the world until it gets to a point. Yeah,
because when I look back now, I'm like, man, I was really lucky. And I'm not trying to put myself down either. I think I got good after a while, but when I hear that stuff now, I'm like, wow, it's like I'm so lucky that it was really just like James from Shins, Isaac from Modest Mouse were like, yeah, this band's cool, you should sign them.
And they were like, cool.
And they were like, okay, cool.
So what's that look like after that? Is it like, hey, man, here's a bunch of money to go make a record in a studio? Or, well, just deliver us something and maybe you'll make some money on the road if you tour it afterwards? How did it work?
We got money from Sub Pop, not a crazy amount, but just like a good, LP1 kind of amount. And Brian Deck from, who was from Caliphone and Red Meat, who he had actually moved to this really fancy studio. So we ended Engine. Yeah.
I made a record.
You made a record. You made a record with Brian, right?
Yeah. It was the last record made at Engine, actually. Although I heard that they started it back up again.
They started it back up again, I think, too. But yeah, so I'd already worked with Brian, so did another thing with him, and that was Mouthfuls, which definitely. And again, I'm like, so we're doing this big 20th anniversary thing next year. And I don't exactly know what we're doing it, but we might compile kind of like a greatest hits. And I'm revisiting some of these older ones and sometimes being like, oh, that was pretty good. And then some of it's like, oh, why did I not, what was I thinking there? But we made that, and then I wrote that song, When You Love Somebody, which was the off the cuff, the total classic story of the like, I literally only had 8 songs written or something, and I had to just like squeeze something out at the end. And you can even tell with that song, I didn't even the verse is just a repeat lyrics twice because I couldn't even come up with a second verse for it. And that song, the record did a little better, but that song was like a thing.
Yeah, still is.
It still is, weirdly. Yeah. And 18 years on since I wrote it, still kind of like pervades.
It's crazy how non-linear it is between how much work you put into a particular work of art and then what it can do for you. You know what I mean?
Because that song makes me think of it all the time. Every time I sing that song every night, and I'm like, all these really young people who are like singing along, and I'm like, you know, some of these songs where it's really just this like beautiful piece of tile art that I'm constructing and no one cares. And that song was just like, I wrote it in the time it takes to sing it. That's how it worked. And it was the truly throwaway track. And if Brian Deck shrewdly was like, that's the best song that you've written thus far, you know, and and we put it on there. But
you know who I heard wrote like that almost exclusively, like writing it in the time that it took to sing it? I heard Petty wrote like that, like a lot. He would just sit in front of a tape recorder, and that whatever came out first, it was just like, okay, well, that's it. That's the song right there.
Yeah, I love him as a songwriter too. I think he's a rock star, you know, in people's minds. But like American Girl, the lyrics of that song are perfect. Like that song is perfect.
Yeah. No, it really is. So you make that record with Brian. This one song takes off and becomes a thing, and then. What does it look like for there? Do you think to yourself, okay, well, we're established now, we can do whatever we want, or, oh, that wasn't quite enough for me to keep a band on the road, and we got to figure out some other ways to do this? Like, what does your next step look like?
The next step was tough because it didn't take off, and like that was at the point where all of my friends got huge, and that's another point in the story where I look back and I'm like, oh man, that's like where you stop. That's like where people are like, no, because it was just like. I was starting to kind of have some expectations that I was like, it's all happening for everybody. So
I'm next.
Sub Pop now. I'm next. This song is doing really well. But it didn't really do anything. And that was kind of the case for the next like few years. I made another record, and it was sort of like, it was sort of looking like diminishing returns a little bit. For a while there, and sometimes I don't remember in the timeline anymore how I was feeling at any particular. It always just kind of feels like you're just moving forward. But I saw an old friend that I hadn't seen a long time recently, and he hadn't seen me since like 2006 or something. Okay. And he's like, man, I can't believe you're still doing this. The last time I saw you, you were like, man, after this one, I'm out. And I don't remember saying that. But I fully believe him. He wasn't like lying. But I was like, oh, in 2006, I was telling people, this is it for me.
Yeah.
Like, this is not working out. And 2006 was a tough year, like, of just that career-wise, just sort of feeling that.
Yes.
I had that second Sub Pop record came out and was like, didn't even have any. It was kind of the lost record. And then I met Vetiver that November, which is another like really important friendship as far as like exposing me to this whole nother world. And I sort of made this deep family of California bands, sort of the way I had a few years before with the Northwest. And so just started to really expand my horizons. And then on that same tour when I met those, James Mercer called me and asked me to join Shins. Wow. And which I did immediately, played my first show with them in December of 2006 and was sort of on the road with them for like the next 3.5 years. And that completely changed my life because I had day jobs and been really broke for that whole time. Yeah. Like even with the like When You Love Somebody song doing kind of well, that was like really just chalked up to a couple of, you know, placements in TV shows that kind of like paid rent for a few months kind of thing. And then Shins was like, I never had to have a day job again after November of 2006 when
that's the game changer right there.
It was a super game changer. And it was another one of those like how at the end of that Caliphone tour where I'm driving home and being like, okay, I gotta go home and do my thing. It was another thing after that Shins tour was done. It was like another step of being like, okay, here's this level. Now I'm gonna go home and then I went home and I wrote the Ruminant Band record, which I think is, for me, if I point people, the Fruit Bats catalog in a way kind of starts there, the modern era of it.
Gotcha.
I almost wish that was my first for the record.
Yes.
Because that's more like what a young songwriter does. We're like, oh yeah, this is pretty...
Gotcha.
It has good moments to it. I'm not trying to put down my first three records.
But they're kind of feel, to you kind of feel like there was a BC and an AD.
Yeah,
of
exactly.
your band.
And that's
Gotcha.
that's the new era. And it was like, I even was trying to change the name of the band to the Ruminant Band, which Sub Pop
so
was like,
good
don't
that you
change
didn't-
your name. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, but I can call the record that. So that sort of signaled that change. So in a way, yeah, that's the Anno Domini there. And
Aren't you so glad that you had people in your life there to tell you, like, no, man, don't do that.
Yeah.
You know,
well, and then I did it again in 2014, and I really did like stop doing Fruit Bats for a while. But after Ruminant Band, it's been, and I was kind of still sort of crossfading with being in Shins, but I had a little bit of money in the bank, not crazy amounts, but like enough that the Shins I was not able to like buy a house or do the kind of like normal things, but I was able to kind of ostensibly kickstart my own band with it.
Yes.
That was the investment.
Yep.
Even from a financial standpoint, because I was able to kind of like make tour a little nicer for people and and just sort of feel like I was a professional music guy for the first time in my life, where this is like something that I can actually put something into.
You know, you were talking about how after you put out Mouthfuls, you know, it goes for a second, and then you feel like you're starting to get diminishing returns. I read a book a couple years ago. I think it was called The Hump or The Slump. Very short book, about 100 pages long. And this guy's talking about just regular, normal businesses smart businesses that you would be in instead of the music business. And I suppose in the music business, we call it a sophomore slump, but that idea, that carries over to like a lot of different businesses. And what this guy was talking about, he said, well, analyze and look at what you're doing and see if this is just a slump that's fixable. And not only can you move forward with this, but you should, because it will pay off, or if you need to cut your losses. And I remember reading that book at a time exactly where you were, this would have been like 2014 or 15 for me, and thinking long and hard about it, searching my soul and being like, you know, it hasn't been what I thought it was going to be. And in fact, I've kind of failed at many of the benchmarks that I set up here, like spectacularly. But I do think that there's some meat on the bone here in a serious way. And damn it, I'm going to push through here. And I'm so glad that I did. I mean, obviously, you must be so glad that you pushed through that time and didn't just throw in the towel and say, well, my friends all got big. It didn't work out like that for me in the moment. So I'm going to, sell bonds at an investment bank now.
I think it's funny because I think it may even chalk up to my sort of unambitious, the unambitious word that we keep using. It may almost chalk up to that because I think I had my expectancy for it and my ego for it was really small. Yeah. So I think I actually was probably able to weather the storm better because I was kind of like, oh well, this is kind of what I expected. A little like there was a big side of myself that I think if you had like a spectacular ego and you're like, I have to be like a rock star out of the gates or nothing. Those are the people that really can get destroyed by that. And I think I was like, I think in a way the thing that you would have thought would have held me back from even just like starting this thing was the thing that kind of helped me survive.
Have you ever seen that movie Greenberg with Ben Stiller?
Yes, but it's been a really long time. Long
story short, we're talking about that spectacular ego that can't deal with, just the smallest setback. That's the character he plays in that, and he's 45 years old, and all of his friends have moved on from the band that they were in, and have started lives, and he is still like, when he goes and has beers with him, he's like, you really fucked up that thing in the band, man. They're like, dude.
I mean,
we've moved on.
I know a lot of people like that. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
In this, in music, and well, I'll just say specifically in music. And I will say, like, anyone I know with that specific personality trait is either not doing it. They're like somewhere they quit.
They quit.
Or they're a huge rock star.
Yeah.
Those are the only two options for that. You can't kind of be like the sort of middle class loping along person for 20 years and have that, because it will eventually devour you.
Yes.
I have enough of I try to tap into some kind of like lion side to myself, if I can, because I think it's important, especially more lately. Been trying to do slightly more like just manifest bigger things a little bit for the past couple of years, instead of just being Mr. Midwesty aw shucks guy. Like sometimes try to wake up in the morning and be like, I got this.
We're doing
this.
this.
The world is mine.
Yeah.
But it's still it's hard for me to tap into that.
It really caught my ear when Eric said, "The next step was tough because it didn't take off, and that was at the point when all of my friends were getting huge." And that's another point in the story where I look back and I think, oh man, that's where you stop. One phenomenon I've noticed a lot talking to people as I've done this podcast is the fork in the road that all creative people face when a particular project doesn't pan out in the way first expected. Broadly put, one direction is quitting bitterly, while the other direction is learning, changing, and marching on. There's a poem by W.H. Auden that addresses that former path, that path of bitterness and refusal to change. I can't read you the whole poem here, it's about a book-length work, but there are two passages that I'd like to highlight. The first is a description of the people that take that path, and the second is the reason why they do. This is an excerpt from W.H. Auden's The Age of Anxiety. Estranged, aloof, they brood over being till the bars close. The malcontented, who might have been the creative odd ones the average need to suggest new goals. Self-judged they sit, sad haunters of perhaps, who after years to grasp and gaze in get no further than their first beholding. Phantoms, who try through much drink by magic to restore the primitive pact with the pure feeling, their flesh as it felt before sex was, the archaic calm without cultural sin which her Adam is till his Eve does. Eyeing the door, forever expecting, night after night, the nameless one, the smiling sea god who shall safely land, shy and broad-shouldered on the shore at last, enthusiastic of their convenient and dangerous dream. While days away in prairie places, no person asks what is suffered in ships, small tradesmen, wry relatives on rocking chairs in moss-grown mansions. Mothers whose causes for right and wrong are unreal to them grieve vaguely over theirs. Their vision shrinks as their dreams darken. With dulling voice, each calls across a colder water, tense, optative, interrogating some sign several who sadly fades. So that's the first excerpt. Here's the second excerpt, much shorter. Yet the noble despair of poets is nothing of the sort. It is silly to refuse the tasks of time and, overlooking our lives, cry, "Miserable, wicked me, how interesting I am." We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. Talk to me a little bit about, it sounds like from your earliest days, whether it was from necessity or from interest or both, recording has always been an integral part of your writing process?
Yes.
Is that a fair thing to say?
Very much so, and I'm actually, I wouldn't say I'm struggling with that. I'm actually writing a new record right now.
Awesome.
And
For Fruit Bats?
For Fruit Bats, and I'm constantly trying to shed that I would love to be able to sit down with an acoustic guitar and write a song.
Gotcha.
And as much of like a folk rock guy as that I get sort of pinned down as, I always think like the ideal folk rock singer-songwriter guy is going to be able to sit down with an acoustic guitar in their living room and like write an incredible song start to finish.
Self-contained, yeah.
And it's so rare that I do that.
Really?
Almost never. I have a song, Singing Joy to the World, which is on the Ruminant Band album. That's definitely my most songwriterly song. Like if I was going to submit something to the songwriterly guy submission line or something, that would be the one where and that's like the one where I really did sit down and I wrote like this story song, this kind of moving story song. And but yeah, I'm a studio guy. I like to be able to physically cut a song up in Pro Tools and move the bridge over here and change the key and change the tempo. I love to think about singing to a tempo, and I sort of like that as a tool. But and I think it comes from just starting with that 4-track thing. I've just always liked I've never really moved into being a full-fledged producer guy either. I think some people usually kind of go that route, and I'm interested in it, but it's like I still like being a singer-songwriter and having someone else take the ball into the end zone for me. But
and also, I mean, going that full-time producer route is just that, it's full-time. And I mean, if you have a project that you're writing for that you want to put out albums on a regular basis, like to me, I don't see how you can be doing anything else that's of a serious time suck. I mean, it takes so much time to get things. It takes a lot of time to put something nice and creative together. You know? It takes, for me, 2 or 3 years at a pop at least. You know?
Yeah, I'm not super prolific. Like, I wish that I could be one of those. Yeah,
sure.
I know Kevin Morby. I think he was saying he writes in bed a lot. Like he's like gets in bed or sits in bed. I'm not sure if he's like. I'm really paraphrasing him now too. So, but he's like one of those prolific people who sits with an acoustic guitar, and it's like A to B kind of thing. But me, I'm like, I sort of lay down a groove and come back to it in 2 weeks, and I have 4 lyric lines in there that are anchoring things, and it's a collage process.
So you obviously then have a couple songs that you're working on. So what's a day look like for you? Is your studio at your house?
No, my studio is, I have a little room at my house, but I actually have a little sort of working studio
so you have
on the other side of downtown LA from here. But
so what does your day look like then? You get up, you have some breakfast, and then you have several songs that you're working on, and you just decide which one you want to.
And I'm a morning writer. Okay. I wrote a song yesterday morning at like 7:45 a.m. I had sort of been working on it kind of late, but I'm like an early to bed kind of guy, and I was working on it, and I was like, okay, and it was just like planted in my brain, and I sort of woke up like Christmas morning, kid style, like where I was gonna try to sleep in a little bit, but I woke up and I was like, that thing was just hanging there from the night before, and I was like, let's get in there, and I got in there and got it going. So it's not totally done, but I have kind of like about six songs going now.
But that's the funnest part of a song though. Like once you get it to that 85% mark, and you're like, damn, this sounds great, and the last 15% is just. You figured out the entire crossword puzzle, and now it's the 3 easiest words to figure out. And you almost just want to like leave that there for dessert after you've worked on a harder song earlier in the day.
And that's when I hear those early records of mine, I'm like, I didn't finish the crossword puzzle on those. It's a little like, I definitely hear it. They just sound unfinished to me. And not even 85%. Some of those are 65%.
Sure.
But yeah, I love that. I kind of like the puzzle of it.
Yeah.
And then you get those few on record too that are just one big blast, and those are always, of course, the ones that everybody loves.
Yes,
because the they can smell that immediacy from a mile away, and that's that's what I mean. Again, I love a honed and crafted kind of song.
Totally, but yeah, the lack of forethought in songs like that. There's just a musicality to songs like that that your conscious brain can't manifest itself. I'm trying to make the exact opposite transition that you're making now. I always write with just an acoustic guitar, and in the last 5 years, I've gotten much more into recording at home and stuff like that. And I think what you really lose out on when you're just writing with an acoustic guitar in hand is, I think that's when you do get to like that weird demo-itis place with stuff. Whereas when you're actually committing the stuff to tape, when you're recording it as you're writing it, it's the exact right BPM because that's how it came out. It's the exact right key, it's the exact right length. Whereas I think sometimes when there's a lag between the writing of the song and then the recording of it, you just forget those little details, those little parts like the spirit of the song that actually turned out to be the whole fucking thing.
Yeah.
So that's a frustrating part about writing just with guitar, and why I think the method that you're describing here, I'm so interested in. I think it really comes across in the recorded medium totally different when you're writing like that.
It's a great way to do it. I'm just trying to shake it up just to get some just variance in my style.
Yeah,
I think.
Man. So take me back to, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to delve into it a little bit more. There was a time when you shut Fruit Bats down around 2013, 2014. Were you doing that to start another project, or were you doing that because you just needed a break in general from writing, touring, and recording? What was the impetus there between your hiatus?
I think I was going through some personal stuff, which I think in retrospect kind of played into it, and not that I'm like I usually don't let that stuff get me down too much, but I was kind of going through. It felt like I was going through some changes, and I think it was another in that kind of constant battle with like, what is Fruit Bats versus who am I? Like, and I kind of thought, and I have been working on film scores, which I still do occasionally. A bit like blundered my way into doing those sometimes, which is pretty great. And I think I was just I was like, maybe it's time for me to just be me. And immediately found out that like the Fruit Bats name is like what people are interested in, like, and it doesn't matter that it's like
exactly the
just
same thing
me anyway. Yeah. And it was just such a dumb move. Like, I fully copped to that. It was just like a completely dumb career, kind of a career, it killed it for the moment, and then things got really good after. But it was a career stalling move that, like, had I foreseen that, I would go back in time and be like, dude, don't do that. But it all worked out.
Sure.
But it was, I was really just like, and then I was going under my name, but Fruit Bats had to be in parentheses always anyway. And I was like, what does it even matter? Like,
were those personal challenges that you were talking about, were those challenges exactly what you're talking about now, which is finding an identity there, or was it other stuff that was?
It was like life stuff too. And, but like, just a few things in my life that were derailing a little bit, like personally derailing.
Yeah.
And then I ended up making this EDJ record, which I'm really proud of. And I always joke and say I always loved those kind of lost singer-songwriter records that no one's heard of, and from the 70s, and thereby I'm paraphrasing Andy Kabik from Vetiver, who was like, he loves these lost singer-songwriter records, thereby dooming himself to be that
to
himself.
Make those.
Yeah. But I was like, I finally made my record that nobody heard, that people are going to hear someday and be like, no one heard this one.
Hipsters in 30 years will be fine. The dude from Fruit Bats.
Yeah. He
made this one here.
Yeah. But I made that, and then then in 2000, it was like a couple years of just trying to do that, and it was humbling, and I was definitely back to square one. I lost like all my infrastructure. I had no agent or manager or label or anything. Like, I went I really was like, that really did it, you know.
Wow. That's frightening.
Yeah, it was a little scary, like, but also kind of invigorating, and it was a little bit of a shakeup. And then it was in 2015, My Morning Jacket reached out, because Jim has always been a fan and a supporter of me, and we're friends too, and said, and we're like, do you want to do this EDJ thing opening for us on tour for the like a 3-week My Morning Jacket tour? And I was like, I should have Fruit Bats do that. That's a better move. Like, I'm not gonna be able to like go and do solo in these amphitheaters and stuff. And I was like, would Fruit Bats be cool? And they were like, oh my God, I didn't even think you were doing that anymore.
Yeah.
Yes, like even better.
Yeah.
And that's always a good. I didn't have an agent, and Josh, our agent,
who
we share. Like, I was able to track him down and be like, hey, I'm going on tour with My Morning Jacket. Will you help me? Like, that's always a good thing to sort of have like a little.
Some juice.
Those guys, just in the same way that other bands, it's always been like other bands come in and save my ass.
Yeah. Yeah.
And those guys swept in and totally saved my ass. The way that Shins had and Vetiver had, like, just different. You gotta appreciate your peeps, and hopefully I can or will do that for somebody someday. But
well, and maybe that goes back to the earlier question of, your original break of your friend introducing you to Caliphone, whether that would have happened in another time had that not panned out. And I think it's sounding like the answer is like, yes, absolutely. It would have. I think when you have something, when you have a gift like you have, people can recognize it. It's very obvious, and that doesn't mean everything's going to be honky-dory all the time, but it's really cool to hear that you were able to, in a way, step away for a while, and yet what you would put out into the world musically was still had a heartbeat there that people were paying attention to, and you were kind of brought back into a fold in a certain way. I mean, that's really encouraging.
Yeah, and somehow I think the absence kind of weirdly helped or something. There was some kind of Fruit Bat's always been a little bit of a slow grower kind of band anyway for people. So I think whatever in that little interim, in that record that nobody heard, and then coming back out, and the My Morning Jacket tour was crazy too, because it was like, sometimes you do those opening tours and it's really pissing into the wind. Like, it's not, it doesn't, you're playing at 5 p.m. in broad daylight to people who are walking in who just bought their $18 beer and they've got their backs to you. But that tour was like the opposite of that. It was like their stage was on risers, so they would part the sea for us every night. So we would have the entire stage every night.
Oh, man.
And then the miracle of miracles, and this shows you how stacked the decks are for headliners, is it was like they have a lighting crew, but their like assistant lighting person was taking over for the main lighting person and was like, hey, can I light you guys?
Just for practice
every
for
night
themselves?
For practice, so I can practice on this rig. And I was like, cool. And I kind of thought they would just go beep, boop, and they learned every chorus hit, every guitar solo. So if you were at that tour, we were like prowling the stage. We had the entire stage every night with a perfectly choreographed light show, and it was just like it looked like a co-headlining tour, like just physically looked and sounded like, and it makes you play really well.
Man. Do you travel with a lighting designer now?
No. I would like to. It's like something we've kind of considered, but it was so that was like, it really like kickstart. Like, we played markets on that tour that we came back and headlined and sold them out for the first time ever, which is that's not usually, that's like how like your agents and managers try to convince you that
to do a tour,
and they're just like, it never works.
No.
And that actually did. But we had like a really stacked deck in our favor with that like lighting thing and the stage thing, because it sort of just makes it just like legitimizes you. And I think there was enough Fruit Bats fans in those audiences, because we have a similar fan base. It's just way smaller than theirs. I think we also had like a radius of every 20 feet, somebody singing along, and the other people around them being like, oh, this is obviously like a thing, and then we're well lit, and it ended up being this like extremely transformative, very next level kind of tour for us, which is really rare and very lucky. Yeah. And we kind of did the tour was, in a way, was like just to get things going. I was like, I would have accepted anything. I was ready to do that tour anyway, and those are always really fun, and we're friends with them, and it was going to be great. And you
get to see My Morning Jacket every night.
Yeah, totally. It was going to be great anyway. And then Jim was bringing me out to sing with them every night too. It was just sort of like, if you could have written down the ideal, like, let's get things started again. What's the best way to do that? It was that.
That's and you know, I think what it also speaks to, besides all that fortuitous stuff you were talking about, is My Morning Jacket's audience too.
Yeah,
I mean, because there are certain bands.
That's a great audience.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, all audiences are not the same. Some audiences for certain bands, and for whatever reason, this isn't a knock on them, but like they are there to see their band, and that is it. They could give a shit about, and that's cool. No problem there, but that might not be the band that you want to open for. An audience like My Morning Jackets, I mean, those are music listeners, hungry, on the prowl for music. All the time.
There are My Morning Jacket super fans too, because they travel around. They like, you know, have kind of a Deadhead like audience as far as like the traveling. So you kind of start to recognize people at those shows if you're on tour with them for several weeks, and you are, and they started to love us. Yeah. And so you see the same people, and then by the end they were like singing along to our and I'm actually like still friends with some of those people. Like you sort of get to be friendly with them. You meet them at meet and greets and things like that. And now they come to our shows, which are smaller, and thereby it's much easier to interface with people. But yeah, I mean, that was like, it was kind of ideal. When I'm talking about it now, I'm like, oh yeah, that was amazing. You couldn't have written that out as a game plan, really.
No, I mean, it just never would have worked. Like, you know, one of my favorite parts about doing this podcast is it always makes me realize when you follow, you know, people that you admire or friends of yours from afar, it always seems like their trajectory is this perfectly 45-degree line going up and up and up, and that there's no, and, you know, to hear you talk about, I mean, you had two major junctures where there was some real adversity and questions as to what was going to go on. I mean,
my graph would be a very dramatic Himalayan mountain range of
Man, well, thank you on short notice for taking the time to do this. I can't wait to play with your new band, Bonnie Light Horseman.
I know, which
next
we're going to
week.
be doing like next
couple weeks,
or a couple weeks or something.
Yeah. And thank you for looking for parking in downtown LA. I appreciate it.
I made it. I figured it out.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ed. That's our show for this month. Thank you for joining us. This month's episode was brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Fruit Bat's latest album is entitled Gold Past Life, out on Merge Records and available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again, you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.